Flies and flowers. Yeah, the reason I chose the name flower flies is because that's what hoverflies are called in the United States. And I thought it was very appropriate for a meeting of the Wildflower Society. So flower flies, hoverflies. Um, the subtitle there, Hoverflies, the flies everyone can love. That's the title of the talk that I gave on hoverflies to a local group earlier this year, and I like that title, so I've put that in brackets as well as a subtitle. A few things to say from this slide. You'll notice in the top left hand corner there's some initials, PT. That stands for Paul Taylor, because I'm useless at taking photographs, and so I've been and got permission from quite a few people to share their photographs, because there's a couple of mine, but you'll see the difference. So there's initials on the photographs, usually in the bottom left hand corner, and at the end there's a slide that credits all the people who've allowed me to use their wonderful hoverfly photos. So this is a hoverfly called Episurfus boltiatus, or the marmalade hoverfly. Not many hoverflies have British names, or not that are accepted. I'll use a few, and I know at the end of the last meeting there was a discussion, Janet, if you remember, about following the Bryophytes one about Latin names. And if you're OCD on Latin names, I suggest you go and pour yourself a stiff whiskey now and have it there, because I'm useless. And I shall do my best, and hopefully I'll be there or thereabouts, but if I'm not quite right on the Latin names. I did attend the British Mycological Society's autumn meeting in Strathpeffer a few months ago, and I was talking to Bruce Ing, who wrote a book on slime molds, and he was telling me that on the continent, the names that they use, the Latin names, and they're probably much closer to what the original would have been. It sounds totally different to the Latin names that we use here in the UK. So that's my excuse anyway, so we'll give it a go. But this is the marmalade hoverfly, and let's see where we're going. So this is what we're going to do. I don't like alliteration, but I couldn't resist doing a bit of alliteration for this talk. So we've got a forward. We're going to look at flower fly features. What makes a hoverfly? Fabulous families, a few jewels in the crown. Favourite finds, living the dream, and fascinating facts, the wow factor. So it'll be a bit different to a lot of talks. I've got a lot of slides. I may have to shoot through some at the end to finish and show the photo credits, but I want to share something of my hoverfly journey. I've been studying hoverflies since 2005, 2006. So is that 16, 17 years, something like that. And it's been a wonderful journey, and it's been a real privilege. And so I just want to share something of my favourite hoverflies, some of the facts about them, some of the wildflower facts that go alongside, and just hopefully the passion will sort of be contagious. And next year when we're out in the field on Wildflower Society events, we can see what hoverflies might be around. But hoverflies are so often seen as being flies are so often seen as being something negative. Flies spread disease. And I can still remember my mother running around the kitchen, batting the air, saying exactly that when she had a fly in the kitchen. And they don't have a good press. Some of you may have read some of the Patricia Cornwell Case Scarpetta novels with the titles here like Blowfly, and think of the sort of bloated corpses. Or there's the film The Fly, when Jeff Goldblum plays this scientist who makes a big mistake and ends up as the human fly. And for every one of us, they reckon there's 17 million flies. So that's enough to make my mum's skin crawl. But things are changing. For one fly family at least, hoverflies, people find them just the most wonderful thing. The UK Hoverflies group, which I was very privileged in setting up quite a few years ago now, there's over 6,000 members, which is absolutely wonderful. And every day people are uploading photos of hoverflies for identification and sharing their thoughts and all the rest. And we've got about 6,000 species that have been described in the world. Here in the UK, there's just under 300 species. Every year we have a few more that are added to the list. So about 300 or so species. And they're wonderful. They're all shapes, all sizes, all colours, lots of different habitats, lots of different habits and behaviour. They don't sting, and they're the gardener's friend. They're super pollinators in terms of plants, and also they're great at getting rid of aphids. Lots of the hoverflies we have, the larvae actually are on plants, and they're actually feeding on aphids. So they're the gardener's friend, and they're the most wonderful creatures. A couple of quotes. This one from a book, The Natural History of Hoverflies. Taking a little time to become acquainted with hoverflies is invariably to become smitten by them. Hoverflies are diverse and beautiful, and their habits and their behavior provoke both wonder and curiosity. And that's, from my perspective, that's absolutely right. And then from the Bugs Britannica, hoverflies are among the friendliest and least disconcerting of flies. And that photo there is a photo of a little hoverfly called Cyrita pipiens. If you look closely, you'll notice he's smiling at you, and being very sort of the sort of mouth there, the black mouth, you can just, it looks like he's smiling, being very non-disconcerting. And actually this species, most of you I guess have got gardens. If you go out in your garden, a lot of you around the flowers will have a little black fly. It probably looks like a little bee whizzing around, and there's a good chance that it's Cyrita pipiens. They're quite fascinating creatures, and they do a wonderful job in the garden. And there's a third quote. They're great. Now, everyone thinks that Tony the Tiger said that about Frosties, but the truth is that Tony the Tiger is actually a massive fan of hoverflies. And in its original context, that quote was saying how much he enjoyed hoverflies. So I thought I'd throw that one in as well. So flowerfly features. What makes a hoverfly a hoverfly? Well, obviously, they hover. These are two photos from my son, John, and they're masters of the air. The photo on the right there, you can see two little what we call halteres behind the thorax and before the sort of tail on each side. They're two yellow bits, and they act like gyroscopes. And with the wings and the things that they do, they're able to perform the most amazing acrobatics. This slide as well actually shows the difference for many hoverflies between male and female, and it's always great fun to be able to tell the difference between a male and a female. The male is there on the left. You can tell he's a male because his eyes touch at the top of the head, whereas the female on the right, if you can see that, the eyes are separated, and that holds true not for every hoverfly, but that holds true for quite a few species of hoverfly. If the eyes are touching on the top of the head, and then there's a good chance that it's a male. One of my favourite hoverflies, I call it Bacca elongator. It's probably Bacca elongator. And there it is, approaching grass, interestingly, which is a wind pollinated plant. We'll talk about a little bit about that in a while. And another one, I think that's Woodhavens, is it? It's down there, Geum, down in the bottom right hand corner. And you'll see, especially in that right hand corner one, that the hoverfly holds its body horizontally. Most flies let their body droop a bit and the wings are sort of flat and horizontal. In hoverflies, the body stays horizontal and the wings are tilted, which is why one of the reasons why they're able to do the amazing things they can do. The same goes for dragonflies. And so they're masters of the air. They hover. And if you want to get really close and just check that it is a hoverfly, and then what you have to do is look at the wing. And a man called Robin Soames here has put this slide together for me. You'll see that down on the bottom there, the wing has a false margin. The ribs of the wing, those black bits, are parallel with the edge of the ring. And that stops it from tearing with all that's going on. And then all hoverflies, and no other family has this, all hoverflies have what's called a vena spuria, or a false vein. And you can see it just running down there. It's not a proper vein. And all these sort of characters help it to fly, you know, in an amazing way that it does. So those two things along, if you see those two things in a wing, you know that you've got a hoverfly. So fabulous families, they're not so much families, but species and genera, but they don't begin with F. So fabulous families, a few jewels in the crown. Well, we've already seen this one, the marmalade hoverfly, Episurfus boltiatus, and this is a hoverfly that really you're going to see all the time and everywhere. It's found all over the UK, and it's very common. And mallards are a beautiful duck. They've got a male mallard is the most beautiful thing, but because we see it around a lot, we take it for granted. And it's the same with Episurfus boltiatus, the marmalade hoverfly as it's called. It's a beautiful thing, but because they're everywhere and you'll have seen them in your garden and on the flowers and all the rest, but it's very easy to take them for granted. But if you look at them closely, and in a situation like this one I think is on a crucifera of some kind, brassica, and it's the most gorgeous thing. Look at that lovely orange abdomen, and those two black bars which you only get in this species. It's a beautiful thing. And you often get this, they are common, and often you'll get a lovely something like this knapweed or thistle, and you'll get it full of Episurfus boltiatus marmalade hoverflies making their way down. You can see there you've got a male on the left and a female in the middle, another male flying in, a female at the back, starts trying to see which are the males and which are the females. Now, the larvae of Epicercus boltiatus are voracious aphid feeders. They're the gardener's friend. In fact, I only found out last night in preparing for this talk, some of the last minute bits, that now you can actually apply to this Dutch company. You can get little pots with 50 individuals of larvae of Epicercus boltiatus. You can go and put around your garden. It's mainly for greenhouses and things, but where you have problems with aphids, you can sort of get a few pots of these hoverfly larvae and sort of put them out around the greenhouse, and they'll feed on the aphids. And a few weeks later, if you've still got a problem, get a few more pots. And it says there in the blurb at the bottom there, it can consume in those 1 or 2 weeks before it pupates, it can consume between 400 and 700 aphids. So they're pretty effective. And we'll think a bit further about that in a little while. The other flies, another hoverfly that's very common, are the drone flies, called drone flies because they look a bit like the male bees, the drones. And it's a superb, really, bee mimic. And this is the sort of archetypal one, something called Eristalis tenax, and that is the drone fly. There's another photo of one here. These are common again. You're going to see them all over the place. You can see them again often at various times of the year. Very, very common. They'll be in your gardens if you've got gardens. And you can see on it's not always this obvious, but you can see on the eye there's those 2 lines of hairs. And generally the legs and the feet are quite dark. It's a wonderful hoverfly, and again it's got fantastic abilities of flight and can do the most amazing things. That's how you usually tend to see it on a yellow composite there. That's a female Eristalis tenax. It's interesting to see it on a flower, and I've deliberately tried to get a lot of photos with hoverflies on flowers, and I was just reading just last night that it was in 1793 that really a German person called, I think it was Christian Conrad Sprengel, he was the first person who said there seems to be a really close relationship between insects and flowers. Up till then, people hadn't really believed it could be the case, and he got a lot of stick because people said, well, you know, a lot of the botanists, you wouldn't do this, but a lot of the botanists were saying, well, hold on a minute, how can a beautiful flower like that you know, have an importance with an ugly insect like that? And it was only a bit later on where people like Charles Darwin, they started to get interested in fertilization of plants, and Charles Darwin put like nets over flowers, and he noticed that when he put a net over a flower and the insects couldn't get to it, then it would set very little seed, or probably no seed at all. And really, by the end of the 19th century, people were starting to get excited and discover all these things, and also about just how important hoverflies are. Hoverflies, Eristalis tenax, they love snooker. And this actually points out the fact they're around all year, because this was January, and this is the Masters tournament at Alexandra Palace. Some of you probably enjoyed watching that, and suddenly there was a mini invasion of hoverflies, and this was photographed by Anna Cook on her television. That's Eristalis tenax on the snooker table. I just thought I'd put that one in because it's a sort of photograph that you'll remember. And this is the larva of the drone flies. This is the larva of Eristalis tenax. You've heard about it probably, the rat-tailed maggot, and that's pretty impressive. It's got the longest breathing tube, that sort of long breathing tube in the world, and can grow quite long, up to 6 inches, I think, from what I can understand. This is a photo from someone called Walter Grieve, who's the Georgia gardener in America, and said he didn't mind me using this photo because I really like this photo. And some of you may have a hot tub in your garden, and you might love luxuriating in your hot tub and enjoying the warmth. And the rat-tailed maggot, it loves a nice slurry pit or a nice sort of bit of wet sort of old manure, and there it will develop right down with all that stuff, and the breathing tube will be sticking out and bringing in the oxygen so it can survive. And they're quite amazing things. This is another Eristalis one I put in there, very similar, and again very common. This and Eristalis tenax are very common. This is Eristalis pertinax, and again they'll be in your garden, and you can tell the difference. The other one had dark feet. This one, the front feet and the mid feet are very pale. You may be able to see, and on the hind leg there's a pale patch on the middle bit of the hind leg, what we call the tibia. There's a pale patch there which Eristalis tenax doesn't have, but it's not always straightforward identifying hoverflies, but this gives you an idea of what droneflies look like. The last dronefly I wanted to mention to you is Eristalis nemorum, because they've got this wonderful sort of habit of mate guarding. So on the flower there is a female, and hovering above is a male. And they do this, the females sort of spend a lot of their time on plants, and the males are hovering above, just making sure they're safe and that they're not going to go anywhere or whatever. There's another photograph. And it made me think about pollen and nectar from a wildflower perspective, because we know that when a hoverfly emerges from the pupa, it's larva, then pupa, then it emerges from the pupa as an adult, one of the first things that hoverfly needs to do once it's dried its wings is to get some pollen, because that pollen will actually make sure that the reproductive structures in both the male, but especially the female, will actually mature and be able to be used. So pollen is so important right at the start of a hoverfly's life. And but as time goes on, some hoverflies, it sort of switches males because they're doing a lot of flying around and territorial hovering. They need a lot of nectar. And nectar, as you know, is the equivalent for me of a Snicker bar, you know, a sort of high energy, a quick boost, lots of sugar, sucrose, glucose, fructose, and a few other things. So male hoverflies of the marmalade hoverfly, they feed almost 80–90% on nectar. But the females, because they're egg laying and doing all those sorts of things, the females of Episurfis bolteatus, the marmalade hoverfly, will spend sort of a lot of their time feeding on pollen. And when I saw this last night, I assumed that I'd be able to make a great sort of case for this, because there's the male doing lots of flying. He needs lots of nectar to keep himself going. In the female, she's down there on the plant, not flying around so much, laying lots of eggs. She needs a lot of pollen to keep herself going. But interestingly, with this, I found out just last night that with Eristalis species, both of them really have about 60% nectar. And I think it must mean 40% pollen. So it differs between the hoverflies, but it is quite fascinating. But it shows again the importance of the wild plants and those wild flowers to these hoverflies. Now, the heavy brigade, Volucella. Many of you will have gone walks across a meadow, sort of looking for plants, and suddenly you hear a throb, you know, deep throbbing noise, and a Chinook helicopter comes flying over the field, and you know, and you're shaking. These hoverflies to me are like Chinook helicopters. This one is a thing called Volucella palluscens, and often it will hover above a woodland ride just above your head, and you'll see it there, big black and white thing. You'll have seen them, and you'll notice them now. You've been at this talk, hopefully, and they're great big things, and they're wonderful hoverflies, big, but again, aeronautically, they're real aeronauts. And interestingly, these species they lay their eggs in wasp nests. So this one lays its eggs in our common wasp and in German wasps, and it seems to have some kind of chemical reaction going on, so that the guard wasps don't sort of attack it. It can sort of go into a wasp nest, lay its eggs, and then the larvae actually feed on the sort of the detritus at the bottom of the nest and on any wasp larvae that may have died. And these are Volucella palluscens larvae. A few years ago, a friend of mine gave me a pot full of these that had landed in his grate in his front room. There was a wasp nest up the chimney, and I was able to tell him that this is what they were, and so quite fascinating. There's another brilliant Volucella species, Volucella bombilans. Now, what species do you think that one sort of goes into? Which nest? It's going to be bumblebees, and it is. It's specialised in. This is a female. Look, the eyes aren't touching. She'll go into a bumblebee nest, and sometimes the bumblebees understand what's going on. They'll attack her, but in the process of being attacked, she will lay her eggs. But it's a fascinating thing. And the last one, which is one that oh, there's the front end. Look at that. That's beautiful, isn't it? How could you not love a hoverfly like that? Isn't it gorgeous? Absolutely wonderful. Then the last one, which scares people, especially because it does have a tendency to come into houses, is the Volucella zonaria, which has got an English name, the hornet hoverfly. And boy, it does look like a hornet, and it buzzes like a hornet, and it's big, but it's absolutely harmless. And my friend Ian, this is a photo of him holding it just to prove that they're harmless. But they're stonking creatures, aren't they? Absolutely wonderful. And I think this uses the nests of German wasps or hornets, I think. And again, there's some kind of chemical reaction that's going on. So already you can start to see how different hoverflies are in terms of their size, in terms of their behavior, and the sorts of things that they're doing. Now, getting the lowdown about the lowdown, melanostoma hoverflies and platychirus hoverflies. These are the hoverflies that when you're walking along in a woodland or by a field or wherever you might be, there's little hoverflies often actually down near the ground. They're flying around, they're there in quantity. And this one's melanostoma. It's a female with those lovely little triangles. And this is a platychirus species heading toward, I think, is that Germander speedwell, I think. And that's a female platychirus albimanus. The reason I put these on is coming back to that thing about wind pollinated plants, or I think the posh name is anemophilous plants. They're wind pollinated. But a number of hoverflies actually feed on the pollen from these wind plants. And it's back in the 70s, a Dutch team tried to find out, said, are they really feeding on them? They took a load of hoverflies and they looked at the gut of the hoverflies, and they found that, yes, they did have pollen grains in their gut to do with grasses and plantains. And actually those plantains and grasses was the majority of their diet. Then they thought, well, are these flies actually pollinating these wind plants? And they did experiments, and in the end they dyed some pollen blue and red, and they watched the hoverflies and going to plants from the blue and red ones further upwind, and they found the blue and red pollen on other plants further upwind. And so they knew that not only were they feeding on the pollen, but even though they're not very hairy, these ones, obviously they were transporting pollen to those normally wind pollinator plants, and which is quite fascinating. In fact, they would always start feeding at between 5 and 7 o'clock in the morning, which is when the plants actually set their pollen, which is quite interesting. And they actually discovered, they were doing experiments with is it Plantago lanceolata with ribwort plantain, and they found out that where ribwort plantain is in a sheltered situation where there's not much wind, it will actually produce pollen that's sticky. Now, entomophilous plants, the insect plants, the pollen is sticky, so it sticks to the insects and is taken and pollinates another plant sort of a bit further away. But these wind plants in quiet situations were producing sticky pollen, which I find absolutely amazing. And it's those sorts of things that just blow my mind. Absolutely fascinating. Going back to Baccharia elongator, I'll put him in there again because he's heading straight for that grass there. It's all quite fascinating. Now, little black jobs, birders talk about little brown jobs, and we have our little black jobs, Cheilosia. There's lots of small black species. They're not all small and they're not all totally black, but this is a typical one, Cheilosia albitacis. If you can just see, it's a bit out of focus, but the front foot is quite pale, whereas the rest of it's black. And there's two species of Cheilosia that look almost the same, albitacis and ranunculi. And some years ago now, they were separated, and they realized there were two species almost the same, but you can tell the difference in males because the front foot, and you can see it in this bottom left hand corner, the front foot, one of those little segments in the front foot is a different shape, and that's how they tell the difference between the two species. Now, the reason I'm telling you about this is when they split the species, they knew that one of the species, albitacis, laid its eggs in the in ranunculus repens, the creeping buttercup. And when they split them up, they said, well, surely two species so similar can't be laying their eggs in the same plant. And they said, well, maybe they're laying eggs in the bulbous buttercup, bulbosa. And I've got a friend, Rob Foster, and I've contacted him last night. He let me use these photos. He's got a field near him where it's just ranunculus bulbosa. And he's been catching hoverflies there where all the males have been ranunculi. And then he's been doing experiments and actually getting them in a breeding cage like this and seeing what happens. And he's actually sort of worked out they definitely are, well, almost certainly are, laying their eggs down in bulbous buttercup, and the larvae develop within the sort of bulbs of bulbous buttercup, which is quite fascinating. So that's a bit of citizen science that's going on at the moment, and someone who's finding out new sorts of things. Cheilosia variabilis, I love this. It's quite a big one. I love those swept-back wings, and it reminds me of planes like that, and it flies around sometimes like that as well. They're wonderful things. Cheilosia pagana. Look at those headlights. This is very common in the spring. I'll get one of these in a net and have a look, and as soon as you see those great big bright orange antennae, you know you've got Cheilosia pagana. Certainly a female, which have the really big antennae. And then Cheilosia albipila. This is a beautiful, I've only ever seen this once when I lived on the Isle of Wight, and it's feeding there on sallow, which shows how important sallow is at the start of the year, not just for bees, but for flies and all kinds of things. Now, this species lays its eggs in the thistle, the one that grows up in the marsh thistle, in the rosettes of marsh thistles. And some dipteris, it's like I say, I've only ever seen one of these. And if you want to find out if it's in the area, the best thing to do is in midsummer to put your heel into a marsh thistle and have a look and just break the stem low down and see if you can see the larvae of this species, and then you know that it's around, because it's you don't see it, but it's a beautiful thing, isn't it? It absolutely is. And then another nice one, you often find this on umbels, and this looks a bit like a little bee, doesn't it? Maybe a little early bumblebee, and that's Cheilosia illustrata, one of my favourite hoverflies. A little bit scruffy, but a gorgeous little thing. Now, the Heineken hoverflies. Anyone got any idea why they're called Heineken hoverflies? Well, you're all muted, so you're not going to be able to say anything, but they're amazing. The Ringier or Ringier, I'm not sure which, but the Heineken hoverflies. Remember the Heineken adverts? Yeah, refreshes the parts that other beers cannot reach. There's one of the old adverts. There's another one. Some of you, I'm sure, were Dallas fans, even though you wouldn't admit up to it now. That's why we call them Heineken hoverflies. Look at the snout on that. That's incredible. So when you see the mouth parts like that, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, that this is going to be able to reach some parts that other hoverflies can't reach. And that's absolutely the case. A friend of mine, Will, sent me this photo of a Ringier on verbena. Now, no normal hoverfly is going to be able to get down that flower tube. But for the Ringier, it's got no problem at all. And another photo just to prove the point. There you go. Absolutely incredible. And again, these are quite common. You'll see them flying around and start noticing them, and you can actually start to see the sorts of plants. Now, the hoovers, Xylota. Now, it's not easy to find a picture of a man hoovering, but I was determined to do it, and I found one. And the lady's in the background, dusting the television down, so it looks like a joint effort, which is good. But I wanted to make the point that these hoverflies here, they're wonderful. Xylota, I call them the hover hoovers. That's my colloquialism. And you don't see them on, I've never seen them on a flower, but you find them on leaves. Again, they're quite common. And you find them on leaves, and they make jerky movements all over the leaves, and then they'll sort of fly to the next leaf and make jerky movements again, and continue. This is the sort of common one. Wonderful thing called Xylota segnis, and there's another one called Xylota silvarum or silverum, and I love this because it looks like it's had the tip of its sort of tail stuck in a pot of yellow Dulux paint, and here they are together. Now, the reason these are on leaves and do all that kind of thing, if you think when you park your car under a tree in a town or whatever, and you go somewhere or on a Wildflower Society meeting, and you come back and there's all that sticky honeydew on top of your car because you've parked under a tree with aphids in the tree above. And what these are feeding on the leaves is honeydew. And aphids, as you probably know, will stick their sort of rostrum into the phloem, the sugary bit of the plant, and it's under pressure, so it all comes up and it goes out the other end. There's not a lot of goodness in honeydew, so it takes a lot. It's streaming out the other end and streaming onto leaves, streaming onto your cars. And these hoverflies love going along and actually picking up the honeydew and getting some energy from that. They're also picking up lots of pollen as well, because you get a lot of pollen on leaves, especially along the leaf veins, and they're wonderful little creatures. And then there's the wasp mimics. A lot of hoverflies are wasp mimics, and I hope you're just beguiled by hoverflies already. Look at these species. They're absolutely gorgeous. Black and yellow Chrysotoxum species, bisinctum with the two stripes. Chrysotoxum festivum. Oh, I can't wait for the spring. So wonderful. Dasycerphus albostriatus, and that's not an easy one to remember, but I still remember seeing my first one of those, which was at Ampsall Park down the road from where I live, back in about 2007. I found these feeding, first time I'd seen them, found them feeding on what's the plant that Socrates died of, the umbellifer? can't think, it'll come back to me in a minute, you know which one it is. But it was feeding on that, and the most wonderful creature. And I was absolutely struck by it when I saw it, seeing it close up and being able to watch them feeding was absolutely beautiful. Sericomia silentis, very common, very big buzzy creature. And again, very common again, Surface rebezii. These you get all over the place and again through the year. Well, other common species that raise my heart rate, you've seen a few already. Now, I'm just going to leave that up there for a few seconds because I know you'll get excited just looking at that photo. Just think of the spring in May and when the ramsons is flowering in your local wood and you can't wait to get down there. Just imagine that smell of garlic now as you're walking through the ramsons. This is from Paul in by the River Weaver up in, I think it's Cheshire way. And this is my friend Joan, lives up in Scarborough. This is her wood next to where she lives. Absolutely wonderful. And it's a great habitat for hoverflies. But there's one hoverfly that specialises on the bulbs. The larvae feed on the bulbs of these ramsons. And it's this one, Portavinia maculata. So if ever you see ramsons around, this is the one to look out for. And it's a bad photo, this one, because this is my photo. And I took this on the Isle of Wight. There's a tiny patch of ramsons. I was doing a survey of Newtown Nature Reserve. And this tiny patch of ramsons, I was trying to find Portavinia. I couldn't. I went one day and went back again. It was raining. I left. The rain stopped. I went back, and there was this one, this male, sort of sat on the leaf right in the middle. And I was just so over the moon to find that Portavinia maculata. It's again lovely little hoverfly, one to look out for amongst the ramsons. And this one, Myothropofloria, the Batman hoverfly. Any ideas why we call it the Batman hoverfly? Look at that thorax between the head and the tail. Here's another one close up. Here's the answer. Do you recognise the markings on the thorax? Myothropofloria, the Batman hoverfly. It's a wonderful hoverfly. It's got loads of attitude. It flies around. It will land on you. It will buzz around your ear. It's the most marvellous thing. And these are my favourite hoverfly photos. These are two photos of Myothropofloria at Whipsnade Zoo. And it's just this with the red panda. If I was Johnny Morris, I'm not going to, but if I was Johnny Morris, I'll be building a story now based on these two characters. The Myothropofloria, it sort of lays its eggs in rock holes and where there's lots of wet leaves and things. So it's obviously exploring this and discovering that someone's already got there first. But there's one more photo. Look at that, look. Ah, wonderful. Myothropofloria. And another one, I've called it Spring Beauty, Leucozona lucorum. Look at that. What a fantastic hoverfly that is. It loves sort of damp woodlands and that sort of dappled shade that you get in the spring. And you see it flying along and it just makes your day and brings a smile to your face. Taking a photo, that's one of my photos with the plant there. That's actually half decent, amazingly. But it's the most wonderful hoverfly. I've probably said that before, but it's and I thought I'd include this one. This isn't the prettiest photo. It's a lovely hoverfly. This isn't the best photo, but this is the greater bulbfly. This is the one that sort of gardeners run around the gardens with their spades up trying to flatten it. It's probably a slight exaggeration, but it says on the RHS website, I've got this down, the feeding activities of Narcissus bulbfly larvae can kill daffodil bulbs and other plants, which can lead to a reduced spring display. So I thought I'd include that one in. There are lesser bulbflies as well, which feed on alliums and those sorts of things. They're hoverflies. And I put that one in. That's my backer again, Bachelor elongator, just showing actually they are good for the garden. That's ovipositing, laying eggs on a, obviously then to deal with those aphids. So favourite finds, living the dream. I've had some really special finds over the years, and my favourite one probably is this one. I think called Sphaerophoria lowii, which is a rare coastal species. And I've put the equivalent of Stace in the hoverfly world is Stubbs and Falk, and there is Stubbs and Falk. He says, well, we don't know anything about this hoverfly. It seems to be that it likes coastal brackish marsh, but it's very elusive. We can't find out a lot about it. Well, back in May 2008, I was walking in a local, I'm in Bedfordshire, and I was walking in one of the local brick pits, and I suddenly found a couple of hoverflies in cop actually mating. I thought, wow, they look interesting. And I sort of got them in the net, and I wrote to our hoverfly person, said, you know, I don't recognise these, but they're in the book. They look just like Sphaerophoria lowii, which is this rare coastal species. And lo and behold, it turned out to be a pair in cop breeding of this species. It had only been found inland once before at Loch Garten years before, just a single one. And I'd actually found a breeding population in the middle of Bedfordshire, and it was breeding on sea rush. There were a few ponds, and John and I have been back several times. And although it's really, really rare, we can go in Bedfordshire and we can watch them flying around the sea club rush around the side of this pond. And I want to find out a bit more and try and find out, okay, well, where's it laying its eggs, and you know, what's happening. It's a great opportunity, really. Wonderful find. It just shows that you never know what's around the corner. If you're looking, you never know what you might find. And then this one, look at that. This is one of my photos, not very good again, but Caliprobola speciosa. It rolls off the tongue. It lays its eggs deep in the rotting roots of beech trees. And when I lived on the Isle of Wight, I went across to Denny Wood in the New Forest, specifically looking for this. It's only found in the New Forest and in Windsor Forest. And it's the most stunning creature. I was so fortunate that I happened to find one because they're really quite rare. And that's not a great photo, but look at this photo. Absolutely wonderful. That is a hoverfly, and that is a hoverfly that's found in the UK. No wonder people get excited about them. That's one more. That's actually a continental one, but it just shows you how beautiful it is. And then Picota personata. When I was on the Isle of Wight, another one I found in the survey was this one, and I was in a place called Town Copse, and a friend had found this the day before, and he said he'd found it. I've been talking to him on the road and said, oh no, and I went back, and it's actually got, you can probably just see, but it's got a bad wing that hasn't formed properly, and I found it in exactly the same place he'd found it the day before. And really special, really rare species. And there's one that's, you know, sort of not in a pot with a bad wing. They're the most, if you're going to mimic a bumblebee, then that's not doing a pretty bad job. And really special species. And then that's our back garden, and that's Carol sitting there. She's actually arrived. She's sitting next to me in the technical director's chair on my right as I speak. And that's our little back garden, and that's my paddling pool, and sometimes I let the grandchildren use it as well. But in August 2020, Cheilosia caerulescens, which turned up in the country in Surrey back in 2006, and it's a lovely little hoverfly. And it lays its eggs on house leeks, sempervivans, isn't it? House leeks. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner there, you'll see that I bought a butler sink and I planted some house leeks. There it is, just to attract this hoverfly. And so there's my lovely sort of butler sink with my house leeks. And sure enough, this turned up. There's not been many. They're not that common at all. But this turned up, and there it is on the house leeks, and a wonderful little hoverfly. So I was really chuffed at that, actually finding the right plant, putting it out in the garden, and finding this not very common hoverfly actually coming and sort of laying its eggs in my own garden. That's pretty special. And drum roll by animal there. My favourite find ever was here in Walters Copse on the Isle of Wight, where I used to do hoverfly surveys. Something called Calicera aurata. Again, aurata, so it sounds like it's going to be something to do with gold. And I was so excited when I found this. There it is. I found it on a devil's bit scabious. And I saw it coming up with just the head and the antennae, and I thought, surely it's not. It is, and I managed to get it in the net and photograph it. That is Calicera aurata, a most wonderful species. There's 3 species in the UK that breed in rot holes, and getting one of those makes your day. Did you know you could find hoverflies as gold as that? Here's another one. Look at my friend Ian up in Yorkshire, where he had one. Absolutely wonderful. So there are some special things round about. I've got a dream. I'm going to fly through this very quickly. A dream 3. Calicera rufa is another Calicera, like the Calicera aurata we just had, but it's very rare, and it's found in the Abernethy sort of pine forests up in the Cairngorms. Except back in 2011, one was found in Bedfordshire, and then others were found in Shropshire. And it turns out that this species is not heading north with global warming, it's actually been heading south, and we're finding it in pine trees. And as my local hoverfly recorder wrote, it's the entomological equivalent of finding a capercaillie in a Bedfordshire pine plantation. Absolutely incredible. And it didn't appear again for a number of years, and it's found at the RSPB at the lodge. I think it's 2018, and I missed out. I went there for a few hours and I missed seeing it, but I'm hoping still to see this one. I would love to see it. I've been pretty regularly in Shropshire and places like that, but the fact that it's coming south is quite fascinating. And then this is the one that this is what I call my greasy hoverfly. Grease because when I see this, I think you're the one that I want, and I get chills, and they're multiplying. And even more so because this is a really rare hoverfly. We know so little about it. The phantom hoverfly. It's sort of found down in sort of Martin down in Hampshire and up near Yealand, up in Cumbria. But a few years ago, this one was found at Ashridge, just a few miles away from the Bedfordshire border where I live. And that's why I'm getting so excited. I think it's around. I've had email correspondence the last few days with the person who took this photo, an ecologist called Peter Brash, who was surveying with the National Trust team. And he said he was trembling and thumping the air for hours afterwards and kept looking at his phone to make sure he had, photographed his camera to make sure he'd photographed, this species. It's had that sort of effect. And he sent me a couple of other photos, and it's the most wonderful thing. And so that's what I'm hoping to see this year. Right, time's moving on, so I'm going to go. This is one that's found in the pine forest still, Blera phallax, and it's our most endangered hoverfly, and it's been seen for the first time in years in the wild. There's a breeding program going on, and also what the team are doing up there, the Zoological Society of Scotland, is they're finding these pine trunks that are over 40 centimeters wide, putting holes in them, putting lots of pine bits in, and with water, and they're finding that they're actually larvae are actually being sort of eggs are being laid, and larvae are growing in these stumps, and there's a breeding program going on as well, and it's all quite exciting. And this is all for a hoverfly, so that's one I would just love to see so much. And there's one down in there. So I wanted to finish with some fascinating facts because we haven't got a lot of time left. The wow factor. Now the first thing is, hoverflies migrate and decimate, and the two go together. Now this rig is 3 miles away from a rig where a person I've been in contact with called Craig Hanna works. He works as an inspector, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. He sort of clambers around with ropes and things, making sure things are safe, that there's no corrosion going on, that nothing's going to fall apart. And a few years ago, he noticed a hoverfly on his rig. And he thought, well, it must have come with one of the containers that was delivered. It must have been inside a container. But then he started to notice that every year, 3 or 4 times between June and September, he would have occasions where suddenly there were hoverflies all over the rig. And there's one of them there. That's the rig in the distance is the one he's taken the photograph of. And this is what he put on the Hoverfly Facebook group. He said, day 2 of the mass migration over the North Sea. Thousands of hoverflies are made up of these different species. And he said the rig is 120 miles east of Peterhead, 170 miles west of Stavanger. It's right in the middle of the North Sea. And they're getting all these hoverflies. Now, it's stunning that a little creature like this is appearing in its thousands and migrating. And he's got some photos there on some of the equipment that he's taken of all these hoverflies. It's absolutely wonderful. Now we know hoverflies migrate, not so much across the North Sea, but we know they've migrated across from Europe. I've seen that in my moth trap on the Isle of Wight. But my old friend Jason Chapman here, this is a radar that he used to have at Rothamsted Research Station. He stuck the radar in the end, and he was actually recording what was coming in the sky at night and the amazing amount of stuff that was coming over on these southerly sort of airstreams. And he's now gone down to the University of Exeter, where he's doing the same sort of thing. And recently they've released some amazing facts, and I just wrote them down because I didn't want to read them out. So I'll let you have a look at those. So up to 4 billion hoverflies cross to and fro from Great Britain every year. Okay, to and fro. Researchers estimate hoverflies in Great Britain pollinate many billions of flowers, and hence their larvae eat up to 10 trillion aphids. That's why I said decimate. They transport billions of pollen grains on flight and distribute many tons of nutrients between Great Britain and Europe. Hoverflies could therefore be a key to biodiversity and ensuring insect pollination in the future. If we're into wildflowers, we've got to say a big, thank you to the hoverflies for all their work they're doing. So a hoverfly female can lay up to 400 eggs during her approximately month-long life. After their arrival in Great Britain, the insects evidently reproduce successfully. Despite high losses due to predators and parasites, around 1 billion more hoverflies fly back to the mainland in autumn than arrive in the spring. Now think about that. That is incredible. That's equivalent to approximately 28 tons of biomass. And Jason Chapman says that makes Great Britain a net exporter of hoverflies. And so there you go. And one more quote from Jason: "The skies are filled with more than birds and airplanes. Insect migration is happening on a massive scale, and it's really important. It's this huge, underappreciated phenomenon." And those two hoverflies, the two main sort of ones that are there, Eupiodes corolli and our old friend Episurfus boltiatus. Absolutely incredible. And the last thing I want to say is hoverflies respond to love. They really do. And you can show your love to hoverflies with flowers. Maybe you could have a wonderful garden full of all kinds of flowers that are good for hoverflies. There's a name for a lure, a man called Austin Brackenbury, I think it is, or something similar to that. He was the signal box person at Outybridge near Sheffield, and he was into hoverflies. And so whenever he wasn't sort of doing all the handles and things, he had a bunch of flowers, or sometimes even an umble head in a milk bottle, and he'd be recording all the hoverflies that were coming. And it was called the Brackenbury lure. And I've got a lure I'm going to get doing. This is Kevin Costner, if you remember the film Field of Dreams, he said, if you build it, they will come. If you put those flowers in your garden, those hoverflies will arrive. They really will. And this is the plumber lure that I'm going to test out next year. One of these sort of nets that you get for mosquito nets for over a bed, but it's got, and then I'm going to have one of those and put it in a wood, and then I'm going to get a Brackenbury lure, and I'm going to put it in the middle of the mosquito net and put the doors up and just wait to see what happens, and leave it for a while, and then come back and see what hoverflies are sort of buzzing about all over that. So you heard it first here, and you can ask me next year how it's all going. So have I managed to share the love this evening? Lots of resources. There's a fantastic book that's come out by Stuart Bourne and Roger Morris, and it can tell you all about you know, the Aristalis. My photo of Portavinia maculatus in there. It's the only, it got me a free book, which is nice, but it's not a very good photo, I have to admit. But and then the hoverfly group I set up some years ago as a recording means, so people can put photos of hoverflies on there, and the people, I've stepped back a bit now, but the people there will tell you what hoverfly it is. But we ask that you tell us where you saw it, when you saw it, and it all goes into a database, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of records being generated. That's, you know, scientifically, that can tell us what's happening with all these hoverflies. There's even a hoverflies larval group now. Stephen Falk, he's got a great site which has got photos of all the British hoverflies on, and that's my thanks to everyone who's just shared their photos with me so I can share them with you this evening.